Hi, welcome back. We're discussing the selection of aiming devices. The main goal of an aiming device is to make sure that the aiming point that you use as reference coincides with the impact point of your rifle's projectiles. So it's really important that it keeps it zero properly. If you have a shift in the aiming point versus the impact point after every shot, you're going to have a hard time with the aiming device. It also needs to track reliably. If you set it, the point of impact needs to move as much as you expect it to, so that if you need to take a longer shot, you can adjust with confidence and fire. Also, the lens quality is quite important because it helps you to see the target properly and clearly. So when we do selections, the first question is basically, do you need this to go on a handgun or a shotgun or a hunting rifle? And maybe issue a hunting rifle a scout rifle because it will make a difference to the selection and the eye relief. As scout rifle scope sits sort of in the middle of the gun lengthwise, where a normal hunting rifle, the scope sits close to your eye over the action. If you going to select that, are you going to mainly shoot at stationary or moving targets? Now, if you're going to shoot at moving targets, there are several devices with low or no magnification that might work better than a normal telescopic sight, such as aim points, red dots. Even there's some torch clusters that have built-in lasers that you can shoot from the hip with, if you can see the laser dot. If you're going to use it in a hunting rifle, are you going to use this mainly during the day, or are you going to use it at night as well? If you're going to use it just at night, do you need something with infrared capabilities, illumination, or perhaps a thermal scope to allow you to do shooting without any form of light? Do you need a scope that have built-in rangefinder capabilities, or do you put value on Wi-Fi connection or Bluetooth connections to other devices so you can see the picture? And if you're going to shoot predominantly at dawn and dusk, the lens quality is quite important, and you'll probably select a different scope from what you would do for just normal daylight hours. So in general, you want to put a scope on a rifle. The first question is, what's the caliber of the gun and how much recoil do you have? So that'll dictate how much eye relief you require and the size of the scope, basically, physically. So if you consider the distance you're going to shoot at and the target size, that will be quite important in the selection of minimum maximum magnification, and it'll also be worthwhile looking at the field of view at your minimum and maximum magnification. If you don't need something that requires different levels of magnification, you can just go with a fixed power scope with a simple reticle or an AMF reticle. The fixed magnification scopes usually have a bit more clarity in their view if you compare it to a variable scope with variable magnification. If you're going to go for variable, okay, we set minimum, maximum. What do you require? What's the field of view that you require? If you shoot at shorter distances in heavy bush area, you need low magnification with a wide field of view to acquire the target easily, and if it moves to keep tracking it easily. A high magnification scope is not going to work in that application. You might require the scope for target shooting. So if you require it for target shooting, again, what's the size of the target you shoot at? You need to be able to see clearly the target that you shoot at. If you can see it, you can hit it. If you know the distance and the size of the target, it'll dictate again the magnification and field of view that you require. But because you are probably going to want to adjust between shots at different distances, what type of turrets do you need on the scope? Do you need exposed turrets, or can they be covered? And if they're exposed, do you need a high profile or a low profile turret to make it easier for you to handle your gun? If you're going to adjust the scope and you're going to adjust it regularly, what type of adjustment range, elevation and windage wise do you require to do what you plan to do? If you need more adjustment, you're probably going to have to go for a scope with a larger tube diameter because the tube houses the adjustment cluster. Talking about adjustments, what are you comfortable with? Do you work in minute of angle or do you prefer mils? Mil is basically spanning 100 millimeters at 100 meters. So if you adjust 1 mil, your point of impact will move 100 millimeters at 100 meters. The adjustment range is put to bed. How fine an adjustment increment do you need? Do you need quarter of minute of angle? Is that sufficient, or do you need something finer like a 1/8? Mils usually settings are 0.1, so it's 1/10 of a mil per click, so it's 10 millimeters at 100 meters. If you plan to use the reticle that you're going to select for aiming off, then you move away from the simple reticles. And if you go to a mil or minute of angle reticle, it really doesn't matter. It depends on what you are comfortable with. An important factor here is to select whether you want a first focal plane or a second focal plane scope. First focal plane means that the reticle sits between your front lens and your adjustment cluster. So when you change the magnification on the scope, the size of the reticle will change, but the subtension distances stay exactly the same. So with these scopes, regardless of what your magnification is, you can aim off with it, without thinking about it too much. If you have a second focal plane scope, the reticle remains the same size, but when you change the magnification, it means that the distance between subtensions are going to change, and you will have a hard time aiming off with that. So it's calibrated for a specific magnification, and you need to make sure that your scope is on that magnification if you want to aim off with a reticle rather than adjust. On these scopes, especially when you shoot at longer distances, parallax come into play quite a bit more. On a general hunting scope out to 300 meters, you probably can get away with a fixed parallax that you don't need to adjust in any way. If you want to use it for a target scope, you're going to shoot at longer distances, you can opt for an adjustable objective where the adjustment sits on the front lens cover, or you can look at what they call a side focus. Now this is a bit of a misnomer. Yes, you change the focus a little bit, but the main purpose of parallax adjustment is if you fix your rifle properly and you look at a target, let's say 200 meters away, if you don't touch the rifle and you look through the scope and you move your head slightly, if your parallax are set properly, the reticle will sit dead still, exactly where it's supposed to be. If the reticle moves, it means that if you don't have consistency when you shoot and your parallax isn't set right, your groups will open up. So what you need to do is calibrate your parallax for the different distances that you shoot at, and make sure that if you're going to shoot at 400 meters, for instance, you set your parallax settings so that there's no detrimental things happening if your head move a little bit out of place behind the scope. Now people spend a lot of money on great scopes, spend a lot of money on decent rifles, and sometimes forget that the way that you connect the two is definitely a major factor in how well your system is going to perform. So if you're going to select mounts, the question is what size diameter is the scope that you selected, the tube diameter, because the mounts go around the tube. You're going to fix it on a rifle permanently, it's going to stay there. If it's a high magnification scope with low adjustment ranges, you probably want to select mounts that have some form of windage adjustment, so you can get the adjustment that you require out of the mounts, so that when your scope is at the optical center, it hits the target. That gives you an equal amount of adjustment either side, windage wise or up and down. If you plan to change the optical devices on the gun, you could opt for something like a Picatinny rail, where there's a standard gap between the rings that you're going to add to the Picatinny rail, and the weight of your scope is going to dictate the size of the rings that you need. If you have a really heavy scope on a very hard recoiling rifle, you probably want something with more surface area to hold your scope down, and maybe some extra screws, 4 to 6 screws. If you are going to use the rifle for longer distances, you probably want a Picatinny rail with some form of drop to it, say 20 minutes of angle drop. If you have 20 minutes of angles in the back pocket, it means that you can adjust further elevation wise. You can adjust it higher than you would be able to if you just had a 0 minute of angle. On these tactical and longer distance rifles, do you need to put attachments to it? Do you want to install a red dot or a light or a cant level or an angle indicator? So is that going to go on your base, or is it going to go in your rings? Make sure that you are able to adjust all the bits and pieces, or attach all the bits and pieces that you require to your rifle without too much trouble. If you find this interesting, and we hope that we touched on all the questions you might have had, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button, and we hope to see you shortly.